Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 59 of ZK Live. Tonight we have on the wonderful Robert Chickey, also known as Bespoke Finish on Instagram, also known as Vero Metal NA on Instagram. This guy is an absolute beast in the craftsmanship world, huge coatings nerd. We're going to go deep into the weeds. This guy is full of information. And it can be dense sometimes, so ask your questions. Remember, ask your questions with the little question mark at the bottom. Hello, sir.
Hello, Zach. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Wonderful.
Welcome to ZK Live.
Oh, glad to be on.
There is no hiding here. We are live.
Yes.
So for those of you who don't know, for those of the people out there who don't know you, can you give us a little background of you, how you got into the coatings industry?
Sure. So, I started out as a painting contractor many, many moons ago. My last company I started in 1991, and I was a painting contractor for about a little over 22 years. And I had a staff of 12. This is why I really enjoy you, Zach. I see so much of myself in you. I had a staff of 12 and some subs that I work with too, and we primarily provided wood finishing services for our clients where they had say an intact house that had an actual historic finish in there somewhere. And in our part of the country, the oldest homes that we had were probably 1850 maybe. But in 1850, if you had an existing intact finish, in the 21st century, and you wanted to add on to your house, architects and designers would tell you that that's not possible to make them blend. And I said, call me, because I can take a piece of wood that's 150 years old and stick it right next to a wood that you pulled out of the box yesterday, and I guarantee you will never find where that seam is. And so that was our path. But, life intervened, and I got hurt off-site, off of a job, and was not able to work for an entire year. So I had to shut my company down and find a different path. So now I consult, and it's kind of fun sharing knowledge. So here we go.
Love it. Now, do me a favor, go way back. I want to know the first time that you applied a coating or sanded a substrate, and how you got from into the industry originally, and what did that look like? What was it like in that company? And then how did you eventually get to starting your own?
I started the first time I painted, was professionally anyway, was in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I grew up in St. Louis, and I came up here actually I came to Minnesota to go to drug and alcohol treatment because I was a mess before then, I'll just say that. But I was living in a halfway house in Minnesota, and for people that were fresh out of treatment. And there were past clients who went through the program. I went through Hazelden actually. And they would hire you to do, odd jobs. And that's really where my first exposure to painting was. And, it's something, I was painting houses, I was demoing buildings, I was doing all kinds of construction related things. And I just kind of really gravitated towards painting because it was something I understood. I don't know, innately got it. And, I knew nobody in Minnesota. I had zero connections. And this is a really cliquey town, but So I tried working for other companies, small companies, then were not really professional. But by the time I worked for a really professional company, it was basically 1985, and I was 26 years old then. And by the time I worked for that company, and then that was like a year, and then by the time I was 27, I was managing 35 people for another company. I just understood the game pretty fast. And by the time I was 30, I had my second company, and I had my company for 22 years.
There's
And
something about taking the crazy addict brain, and it's a powerful vehicle.
it
And if
is.
you can harness that vehicle by not using, finding a program of recovery, and then harnessing all of that natural talent, that drive, that like insatiable desire to move, man, you can do some big things.
Absolutely. You know, what I really liked and still like, honestly, is being in control of my life. And that was when I was using drugs and alcohol, I was way out of control. And, you know, we've talked, I've told you my story further, and this is not the venue for it. But, you know, honestly, I just have a drive. And my drive, I just don't give up. And you're going to fail in your journey. It is part of the path. And if it was easy, everybody would do it. But it's not easy. It's really hard. And you're going to get the shit kicked out of you, and you're going to get knocked down. But the difference is you have to stand back up. And if you're not willing to stand up, then go work for someone else. And that's okay. That's plenty okay. And,
In fact, it's better there's a lot of people who have no business working for themselves.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
it's a powerful thing to know that and go work for someone else.
Yeah, I mean, I say this to all the people that I mentor and people that I talk to. Being the best at what you do is fantastic. Running a business is a totally different skill set. And not everybody gets it. I mean, and that's okay. I had guys that worked for me for, 20 years. And if had I not got hurt and not been out of work for an entire year, I'd still be doing it. But, life happened and I had to figure it out. So this is where I'm at. And I love wood finishing, and there's so many things that people have zero idea of what is possible.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are in the grips of substances, whatever they may be, alcohol, drugs, it's hard to project what it would be like to not be using, right? Like,
yeah.
Because if you're using all the time and then you stop for a few days, it's painful. And I think a lot of times people project that out to be that's the rest of life. But on the other side of that pain can be a world beyond your wildest dreams. And I'm
Absolutely.
proof of it. You're proof of it. There's a number of people who have been able to have the disease of addiction, but not let it take over their lives. And they've, been able to recover from that. And so It's awesome when you can get past that. I know a lot of people in our industry suffer from, addiction, and it's very prevalent.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is.
But
it is. And it is, there are tools out there, and there is help out there, and being in the throes of addiction is not fun. I don't care what anybody says. In the beginning, yeah, it's fun in the beginning, but you when you have an addictive personality, that fun is very brief. And after that, it's just maintaining. And you are out of control. You're totally out of control. And believe me, I was as wild as hell. And how I am even alive today, I still don't know. But I'm grateful that I am. And it's important that people understand your journey and understand that it is possible there is another side.
I'm here to say it. You're here to say it. Like, I'll tell you guys right now, there is another way to live. And I
There is
know when you're
definitely.
in it, it feels like this is all you know. Your entire biology is designed to keep you in that.
Right.
But there are ways to escape. And if anyone's going through it, send me a message, send Robert a message. Like, there
Absolutely.
is a way past it. I didn't see us talking about this, but this is awesome. There is a way past it. And there is a world beyond your wildest dreams. And,
Totally
I
agree.
hopefully if someone's listening and this affects one person positively, you know, we're one more piece of evidence that anyone can do it.
Right. Yeah.
And that it gets awesome on the other side.
Totally agree. But back to finishing. So let me just say this, that when I was a painting contractor I started in 1991 is when I incorporated, and probably for the first 4 to 5 years, and this was obviously the early 90s, and everything was white. I mean, to this day, I do not like white. I mean, I will not have a white kitchen. I hate white kitchens. I mean, literally, we used to get 55-gallon trash cans and box our paint in it because it was all the same color. Do the whole house. You do a 10,000 square foot house, and all the walls were one color, all the ceilings were one color, and all the woodwork was one color. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. This is boring as hell to me. So I transitioned into wood finishing. But then when I looked at wood finishing, it didn't make sense to me why people use stain. And I say this to all the clients that I consult with, and I say, tell me one other industry where the word stain has positive meaning. Name one. I mean, I'm waiting. It doesn't. And so I took the deep dive into wood finishing. And when I figured it out, and it took me a long time, but we never use stain to color wood. Ever. Ever. My dive was basically to learn reactive color and really incorporating old school things like shellac. I mean, I've never met another person or another company who has consumed the amount of shellac that we did. I know that I personally purchased more than a metric ton of flake. Think about that. That is an enormous amount of shellac. We used to get 200 proof alcohol made in 55-gallon drums delivered to our shop multiple times a year because we were going through that much. We were doing projects all over the country. And by hand. We didn't spray. It was all craft. It was important to me. I mean, we had a spray booth in our shop. I invested in that for clients that wanted, furniture or whatever else we were doing. But on a house, you cannot make those colors, those historically accurate colors, with stain. It is not possible.
So for everyone listening, this man is trashing wood stain. Like, I never heard anyone talk crap about wood stain till I talked to Robert, and because I just didn't know there was any other way to color wood that you stain. Oh, it's stain grade. We're going to take bare wood and we're going to stain it, and then we're going to clear it, and it's going to be beautiful. Can you explain to what is the alternative to stain?
Okay, well, there's lots of alternatives, but essentially is this. Dye is also a great path, but dyes are fugitive per se, and fugitive meaning they fade. But
can you tell me, before we go farther, can you just tell me the difference between a dye and a stain?
Okay, stain is basically three components. It's a binder of some type, a very small amount of binder, a solvent, and a pigment. A stain has a pigment in it. And so the color sits in the pores and on the surface. It hides it provides color to your substrate, but it also obscures the wood. And that's the thing that people don't get. Whereas if you use dye, dye penetrates into the surface. It's transparent or translucent. And so you get color, but you still have depth. But when you go further, you look at what reactive color is. And reactive color, oh my God, there's so many things that can go wrong. And I wouldn't tell people to take on a house until you really understand this. But reactive color is a phenomenon when you do it right that people are absolutely blown away. They can't even believe it's possible. So imagine being able to take a piece of oak and make it completely black, but transparent. Think about that. When you see black today, all you can see is a color, and if there's texture available in the wood, you see that. But you don't see any figure. When you have reactive color, all the figure, all those beautiful pieces of the wood, the reason you bought the product in the first place are there. They're just emphasized. So reactive color is essentially this. You're playing with water on top of it. You're taking an organic product, whether it's a salt, it could be tree bark, seeds, plants, all kinds of organic mediums. And just to talk about organic things, just because it's organic doesn't mean it's not toxic. Let's be clear here. Arsenic is an organic thing. So you have to be careful. But you're taking these organic mediums and you're adding them into water and making a solution. And that solution is put on a wood surface and it reacts with the tannin in the wood at the cell level. All woods have tannin in them, but some have more. But if those woods don't have enough tannin in there, you can put it in the wood. So you can control the reaction. You know, for the most part, you are setting the table for it to react a certain way, but it's still a chemical reaction. So you can take wood and make it virtually any color, and it's completely transparent. And then you put shellac on top of it, and I mean, I get giddy still. I really do. And over the course of my career, I would say I've had more than a handful of people get emotional walking into a space that we did. And let me tell you, there is no amount of money that can compare to that. And when you take the deep dive in wood, trust me, there is significant money available out there because it is a rare skill, really rare.
It is.
And again, when there's open grain wood, we filled it every time. Sometimes full fills, but almost always a partial fill. And again, it takes time. But I mean, it's like you, Zach. If you don't put the effort in the prep and you don't put the effort in the process, you're going to have average. You know, when you can show a client that I can make your even 50-year-old woodwork in the next room that's, you know, they built yesterday, and seamlessly match where you can't tell, there's no way. No way. And I say that to people and they just think I'm kidding. It's like, okay. When you get an architect that says that's impossible, call me. I'll show you it's not.
So there's a post that you have. It's now, you should repost this. After this, if you could do us a favor and repost this. There is a side-by-side 2 pieces of mahogany on your feed that was the first thing I saw that was like, wow, and I've showed it to a bunch of clients. You have 2 pieces of mahogany. One has stain on it. One has reactive color.
Yep.
And the coloring is the same. Like they match color wise.
Right.
One of those pieces of wood looks like it's backlit and it's glowing, and the other one looks like a nice piece of wood. And
Right.
it's that sample that helped me to understand what you're talking about. I will say I know you're proof. I know there are people out there who want this.
Absolutely.
I think that they're very, very rare. And I think they're rarer every day because the industry continues to go down. Like the standards keep going down.
Sure.
And so I can't tell you, I've been in some super high budget projects and I've tried to bring this stuff up and I've showed samples and I've tried to get people excited. And I'm always shocked. I mean, I don't have a huge sample size of this, but
sure.
I've been shocked how my clients, at least, that I've come in contact with as of now, have been like, yeah, like just stain is good. Like that's good, you know. And what we're talking about is great. We're talking about world class. Your wood is glowing the color that you put there, that you use chemistry to change the color of the cells at a deep level in the wood. And then you're highlighting that instead of putting the color over the top of the wood.
Right.
And I know one day I will find the project where they want to do it. But man, every time I get all excited, I'm like, look at this, and I explain and blah, 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 blah. And they're just like, yeah, I mean, stain's good. So that's kind of a bummer. But
it is.
It's neither here nor there. I think knowing this stuff is possible is so huge because my job as a contractor is to give my clients options, right? And especially my designers. Is to give them more tools in their toolbox, more colors in their crayon set, right?
Right.
So I do love the idea of being able to offer this, and I will continue to offer it every time a stain grade job comes up.
Right.
And one of these days we're going to get one. But I'm sorry to digress. I just had to
No, not at all.
So people don't feel like, how come I can't get anyone to do this? Like, you're not alone if you're struggling to sell this stuff.
Right.
But I think there are, there are certain architects and certain designers. It's one of those things like we talk about in the paint industry. Like, what does good look like? Well, John Shear coined that. But what does good look like? And
absolutely,
if you've never seen this type of stuff, then good to you to our client might be a lower standard than we know is possible.
Right. Yeah, that's a huge problem.
Yeah. And as long as I communicate that to a client and I can offer that to them, I found that even being able to offer it helps differentiate me, even if we don't end up doing it.
Right.
We earn trust by showing, I have the knowledge base I have a deep knowledge of what we're doing here. And if you don't want to go to the crazy end of the spectrum, that's okay. But I think it's helped me sell the jobs we have done.
Right.
Even though we didn't use reactive color, it just showed that we had the capacities and the knowledge and the passion.
But even, as I say before, reactive color is, that is a deep, deep dive. And when I teach reactive color, I am really cursory things because there are so many things that can go wrong. Because you are guiding it. It's not like stain. It's not like stain at all. Stain you can control. And when you have learned the pathway that I have, it is actually I've been able to tone reactive color with reactive color. Think about that.
So it's a chemistry experiment, right? We're going on to a job site and we are doing a controlled chemistry reaction.
Yes, essentially. It is water-based. It's still safer than stain any day. And but you have to really prep differently and you have to guide it differently. But again, the depth that's possible, it's mind-boggling. And most people have no idea what's possible. That is one of the biggest problems with this. There's no, as you say, the industry and media tells you what is beautiful. Well, look at this piece of furniture. Isn't it fabulous? And you look at it and you think, I think that looks like shit. Pardon my French. But the industry is telling me it's beautiful, therefore it must be beautiful. And clients come to designers and architects with, the thought that I am hiring a professional and they should know. Therefore, if they say this color is fantastic, well, it must be fantastic. And I paid all this money, so I'm going to go with it. I'm going to settle. And when you're spending millions of dollars, you should not be settling.
All day. I think that it is a huge issue that I work to overcome on a daily basis in my business is we are working with a client who's working on a project with a designer and they have a budget. And I think designers, oftentimes I feel, I found certain designers who are not this way, but I think a lot of designers care more about the furniture and the artwork and like they like that more. I'm not going to now, do they get a higher cut off of those things? Like, I think they do, but I don't really know. I'm not going to say that's what it is.
They absolutely do.
I'm going to say that, I don't want to crucify designers and because they're awesome, but
they are.
It's a rare client that will prioritize, and I think the designers kind of have to drive this often, will prioritize quality finishing. And because they have a budget and they're like, well, why am I going to spend twice as much for you to use this than just paint it? Just paint it, just stain it. And that's a mentality that we have to overcome. I have to overcome on a daily basis.
Sure.
Because that is like, they're going, I'm going to spend an extra 50,000, 100,000. Like we just lost a job using, not reactive, but using the shellac and stripping wood and bringing it back to life. We were $60,000 more than the other person. It was 30,000, 90,000. And my sample was unquestionably more beautiful, far more beautiful. It was glowing, right?
Right.
But the client didn't see the difference in aesthetics to be worth 60,000 in this situation.
Right.
And so I think that is the thing we have to overcome is not every client is going to care to spend 3 times as much to get awesome, right? But the clients that do, we need to be able to offer this to them. So if you could just go over real quick so people have some context. That piece of mahogany that everybody can go back and look at those 2 pieces of mahogany.
Okay.
Can you just walk me through the process of reactive color? Like what did you do to that piece of mahogany? What chemicals, what did that process look like roughly? I don't, maybe you don't remember exactly, but roughly what were the chemicals we were using and the steps, and to give people context of what this is?
I'm not quite sure exactly which chemical I used, but I would say that this was for a company that I did work with occasionally, and I was working on a separate project teaching their finisher at that time. And that piece of mahogany was a pedestal for the chairman of 3M. And it was a beautiful piece of mahogany. And the samples, they made a bunch of samples, all was stain and might have been lacquer, I don't know what it was. But to me, it looked dead. I mean, to them, it was beautiful. And I was just like, okay, do me a favor, get another piece. And I think it was potassium dichromate, but I'm not sure. It might have been something else or something else that I mixed. And I sent him a sheet and I said, follow the directions. And I said, put the chemical down, put a base layer of shellac, and I gave him all this product. Fill the grain, and then put another coat of shellac on top, because we always for every layer of color, we wrapped it both sides in shellac because it's depth. And it doesn't have to be thick. These are thin layers, but it's all about depth. And then I said, and then put whatever varnish you're going to put on top. Trust me, when you're done and you stick those two boards next to each other, you're going to know why. And they did. And the client, of course, lost his shit. And they had this pedestal sitting out in front of their main waiting room, waiting for it to be picked up by delivery service. And I'll never forget this. He said this, the delivery guy came, and it was like UPS or Speedy or somebody like that. And he stopped in his tracks and started looking at this. This is a guy that knows nothing about wood at all. Floored him, moved him, and he said something to the owner of the company like, "My God, what did you do to this?"
And so back to what you did to it.
That's what I did. Yes.
You sent these guys a little bottle of potassium dichromate.
I mixed it in the solution, the ratio, and gave them directions on how to put it on.
So you mix potassium dichromate, which is like a crystal or something, a powder
of some sort, in water.
And you mix that in water, and then
you put it on the wood. I think they sprayed it on because
so you spray it on.
When you play with reactive color, the minute it hits the wood, it reacts. So you have to put it on a certain way. So they sprayed it on, which is possible. Let it dry, and it's water. It dries, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And then knock the fuzz down. It was crotch mahogany. I pretty remember that.
Yeah.
They put a thin coat of shellac on there to seal the surface and prepare so that you could fill the grain. They filled the grain.
How?
Paste wood filler. And I made a custom color using Mixols and paste wood filler. And they, brushed it on, scraped it back off. It was not a full fill. It was a partial fill. Normally, you'd have to fill it twice because it shrinks. And then they let it set up. It was a sample, so, normally they would wait a few hours, but it flashes off pretty fast. Put another coat of shellac on top, and then their top coat. And I don't know if it was varnish or if it was a lacquer, but, the depth is noticeable. It's way noticeable. The shellac makes wood glow. It has a chatoyancy. It ripples.
Oh,
and it's something
that
people
that
are
is a
afraid
word
of.
I have written down here that we need to talk about. So now that you've said the word, chatoyancy, for the people out there, that's a ridiculous word. When you see it written, you're like, that's not a word. Chatoyancy.
Okay, so
what is chatoyancy?
Chatoyancy is actually a visual effect. So if you look at a piece of stone called tiger eye, and you look at it and you kind of turn the piece, it actually ripples. And it gives this bifractory refraction of color. Because normally when light hits a surface, it diverts it. It gets reflected and bent. But when you have chatoyancy, the light actually goes through that surface and comes back out the other side. And so you have this level of depth that is, it's hard to, once you compare it to what a normal finish is, even if you just put one layer of shellac, just one, on a piece of wood, and I'm not talking seal coat, even though that's technically shellac. I'm talking real shellac.
We have to talk about
flake.
that too. Keep going, but we're going to get back to that.
Okay, real shellac flake with, strong 200 proof alcohol that doesn't have water in it, which is not what's available at the store, mind you. But when you mix it high test stuff and you put even a 3/4 pound cut, a thin layer on, looks like there's nothing on. But when you put your top layers on top, wow. People want to touch your woodwork.
Yeah.
It'll shock them when they walk in that room because they've never seen it.
Yep. So back to that point, can you tell us the difference between de-waxed shellac and waxed shellac? I'm guessing it's waxed shellac.
Sure.
That's what seal coat is. Waxed shellac?
Shield coat is de-wax shellac.
De-wax shellac, but there is shellac. There's a
All shellac is naturally waxy. Shellac is an organic product.
Comes from a beetle, right?
It comes from a beetle. It's a tiny little bug about the size of a pinhead. And they attach themselves to trees in India, which is primarily where they're harvested. And they form a cocoon to hatch their babies. And then the babies leave. And then the host dies. And they scrape it off and process it. And shellac basically is 3 or 4 colors. And it's depending on where on the continent it's harvested, what time of year. There's 2 harvests. You get different colors. And there's several different levels of shellac in processing, like sticklac, which is basically actually has sticks from the trees still attached to the shellac. You can buy it that way and process it yourself. And the wax is decanted out during some processes. The best, most of shellac comes from Asia and India, but the best shellac in the world, without a doubt, comes from Germany. It's not even close. And that's where I was buying my shellac. And I bought, it comes in 25 kilogram bags. And I'd buy 100 kilograms, 200 kilograms at a time. And, we would just store it in our little container until we had to use it. And, we had 55-gallon drums of 200 proof alcohol. I mean, I had to have a special license to have this stuff in our shop.
Well, so then when you talk, then you mix shellac with 200 proof alcohol.
Right.
To get shellac.
A solution. Right. You get a solution.
Solution.
Right. And
what's with this pound cut thing?
Okay,
let's get to the bottom of that.
Okay, so a pound cut. So a pound cut essentially means for a pound of shellac flake in 1 gallon of alcohol is a 1 pound cut.
Okay.
So a 2 pound cut would be 2 pounds of flake in a gallon of alcohol, and so forth. And so you can mix it down in, quarts or pints, and you just do math. It's just math.
And why would you want to do a 1 pound cut versus a
3 pound cut? A 3 pound cut. Oh no, I mean there's people that do 5, but it's like jelly, that you can't really control it. And when you're brushing shellac, the thinner, you don't really want to do more than, say, a 1.5 pound cut. And a 1.5 pound cut, you're skilled. You have to be skilled to do a 1.5 pound cut. And brushing shellac, let me tell you, man, it's like brushing lacquer. It dries fast. And we brushed whole houses, huge walls. And so there is a huge, huge learning curve, but it is possible. It's possible to do it because we did it every day. But, you have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to basically take that mindset that I can brush anything when you're playing with shellac, because it's not like paint.
We're going to, for the record, before we go farther, we are going to do a class on this topic that we're talking about today, this summer at ZK Finishing School. So if anybody is interested in this topic and wants to spend a weekend going deep with Robert at our facility, let me know, just as a thing. I have to put that out there because now it has to happen.
Okay. Well, I mean, I look forward to it. I really do. And I think that people should have this skill set in their arsenal, and not just even reactive color, but dye. In fact, today I was talking with Aaron King, who took a class from you, and one of the things he was talking to me about was, just like I walk into a space and there's 5 different wood species, and I'm like, I know that sounds daunting to people, but it's really not. I mean, most wood windows are pine. And I can show you how to make those wood windows match cherry or walnut or oak or whatever. And so that when somebody walks in that room, the only way they could tell that those species are not the same is when they walk right up next to them. But
Somebody
from
had a
afar,
question
no way.
about bin. What is bin then?
Bin is pigmented shellac. That's what it is.
And let's go a little deeper on bin, because that's the shellac that 99% of painters are using today. Let's be fair.
And so Zinsser is probably one of the largest consumers of shellac in the world. In fact, they have their own trading company called Montrose Hauser, who purchases shellac for them all over the world. And I bought from Montrose Hauser before, and let me tell you, they have some good stuff. They just don't put it in the bin, and they don't put it in seal coat either. Just saying. So, yeah.
And how many pound cut is bin?
I think it's 2. It might be 3. I'm not sure. Seal coat I know is 2. So bin might be 3. But again, they have to load a lot of pigment in there to get it to. When you open a can, it seems like it's super thin.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's really not. It's kind of like FPE. FPE, when you first open a can, you think this stuff is water. But, if you look at the can, it has far more solids in it than most American paint. American paints have fillers and crap in them. People have no idea what they're really using. That's another subject we talked about it, but that's a different conversation. But so yeah, bin is a good product, but understand this. When you're playing with shellac in a can, it has been modified to last beyond 6 months. When you mix shellac, that's the shelf life. So when you have fresh shellac that you just made, I've put 30 coats on in a day with shellac, fresh shellac, 1 day. You can't put 2 coats of shellac on from Zinsser without lifting the first one. It just doesn't set up. But seal coat is a good product for solving problems. But really, using beyond 1 layer is challenging. It just is. Because it's been modified. The molecules have been modified to get firm. Because they don't want to do that.
So what are the main things we need to look out for when we're using in the can shellac are multiple coats? Multiple
coats. And so, when you have fresh shellac, literally the stuff will dry in 5 minutes. 10 minutes top. So when you put on seal coat, and that's a 2-pound cut. So again, cut it. If you're cutting it by 50%, that doesn't mean you're cutting it 1-to-1. That's 2-to-1. That's not like if you're taking a half a gallon and adding a half a gallon, that's cutting it 100%. I'm saying cutting it, 50%, so now it's a 1.5-pound cut. But you should even consider cutting it in 1-to-1. So now it's a 1-pound cut. It provides the same, benefit, but it's controllable and it'll dry, and then you can put 2 coats on. But if you're doing 2-pound cut coats with something that's not meant to be layered because it's been modified, you're going to have problems. You get solvent flash. I talk about this a lot in forums, and, I've gotten to the point where I've stopped doing it because people just say, I'm wrong. And I'm like, okay, fine. I'm stupid. You're not. But, go there and continue to have problems.
We have moved away from using shellac underneath our cabinets because we had a lot of issues with adhesion and chipping of paint.
Because it's too thick.
Because we were using multiple coats of bin and to build and sand, and then we would put a top coat on, and hey, that's what everyone's doing in the forum. But
I know
I think everyone is holding their coatings to different standards, and I think more often the standard is, does it look good when I finish and collect a check? Yep, looks good. That's not what my goal is, not to make it look good. That has to happen. But we want to make it look good and last.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
After speaking with you and doing a little more homework, we decided to move away from shellac underneath our cabinets as a primer because of what you're talking about. We were never doing a single coat of shellac.
Right.
It was always multiple coats, and I can see that now. I mean, they're doing things to make it last longer. Is it effective at some level? Yes. Many thousands of cabinet jobs in this country today have shellac on them. Yeah. Great. But is it best practice? And I think it's pretty clear after hearing what you just had to say that it's not best practice.
It's not a best practice. But again, you have companies that they don't take the deep dive, that you are taking, Zach. I mean, that's the issue here, is that people want easy. And the shellac dries in 10 minutes, 15 minutes. You can sand it, and you can coat in a day.
Yep.
And that's great. But like you, I built my business on, I could go back into projects that I did 20 years ago today, and they still look fantastic. Even if they've had, 10 kids and dogs and all kinds of, abuse, it stands the test of time. Because that's important to me. That's my name. I look now. I go back, and I have not been a contractor for a decade. And I go back and I look at architects and designers who I did work for, who I respected. And my work is still on their website. It's the best they've got.
I'm redoing some cabinet doors. Couple of cabinet doors next week on the last project that we used shellac as the primer on.
Yeah.
And we have obviously an incredibly durable top coat in a 2K poly.
Yeah.
But it's chipped already once. We've touched up the chipping, and now it's starting to wear off around the handles.
Yeah.
And I'm still feeling the pain of that shellac.
Right.
And we don't know any better until we know. And I thought I was doing best practice. And
absolutely.
So
and again,
somebody hears this.
That's what we talk about, knowledge. Most finishers today get their knowledge from the paint store or from their vendor from the paint store, their salesman. And you have to understand where they get their knowledge from. It's a chain. And so they're getting their knowledge from the companies that supply products, who are really chemical companies at their purest form. And that information is biased. And so when they tell you, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, until 2 or 3 years later when, we're using a different product, that really wasn't the best stuff. And, I'm sorry that you are eating $50,000 worth of woodwork, but, your problem, not mine. So if you take the time to understand the chemistry, not just of that product, but of that section or segment of products, you don't have to take the deep dive in chemistry like I have. You don't need to do that. But you need to take a basic idea of what a coating is, because it's only 3 things, 3 pieces, and then all the other crap they put in it to make it more flexible or to be hard or whatever attribute they're trying to achieve. So having knowledge so that when things go wrong, you can, discern and go backwards and determine what happened.
We got to go back.
Okay.
I need you to tell me the 3 things that are in a coating.
Okay, so in a
You said it
coating,
already, but we need to go over this
okay,
again because every painter needs to know this.
stain is basically 3 things. Stain is a solvent, and water is a solvent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's a solvent, a pigment, and a binder or dryer, somewhere in those 2. It depends on what they use. And a paint is a binder, which is your resin, and that could be acrylic, that could be, linseed oil, that could be whatever. A pigment and a dryer. Those 3 things. And they're basic. And dryers can come in all kinds of forms. And again, a clear finish is a resin, which is also your binder, a dryer, and a solvent. It's basic. And then everything else they put in. And, that industry is constantly evolving because of the EPA and VOCs. And again, depending on what they use for the catalyst and dryers, you need to protect yourself. And one of the things that really just irritates the hell out of me with coatings companies is, when you're talking about chemistry, let's just talk about basic chemistry. There's 3 coatings that are super dangerous, and that is pre-cat lacquer, catalyzed lacquer, and conversion varnish. Those are the old school things. Now, when those 3 products, when those resins hit the air, it creates formaldehyde. It's not in the product, but it's a chemical reaction with oxygen. And, the coating companies say, well, it goes in the air. Well, you're in a sealed environment, okay? Where's it going? It stays there. And then it gases off for months. When you spray conversion varnish, you can smell that. You open up a cabinet door, you can smell it for a couple of months. Now, a 2K urethane is a different system. And a lot of times it has isocyanates, which are, again, a toxic chemical. But when you use a 2K urethane, whether it's solvent-borne or waterborne, that chemical becomes part of the film. And so it's trapped. So the minute it dries, it's gone. I have taken 2K urethane, solvent-borne systems, made a sample, and I had to drive it to a client's house in an hour. I stuck it in my car, and I didn't smell it. If that was conversion varnish, there's no way. I mean, I wouldn't stick a conversion varnish sample. I would mail it to somebody before I would. I mean, it's so bad. And is it less expensive? Yep, it's less expensive. But what is your life worth, and what is your client's life worth? And people that are taking these chemicals, they're taking conversion varnish, they're taking catalyzed lacquer and pre-cat lacquer, and they're thinning them because they want a tighter film. Wrong, can't do that, bad. That is just a disaster waiting to happen. But a 2K urethane has been formulated to be reduced. But that doesn't mean you can reduce it with lacquer thinner or with water. You have to use the reducer that comes with it. But, it's amazing what's possible out there if you educate yourself and look. I mean, the technology that has happened in the last decade in coatings really it's mind-boggling. It's probably more than the previous 100. Huh?
2K urethane is amazing.
It is.
It's amazing stuff. And it's as durable of a coating as when clients are like, can my kids scratch my table? I'm like, well, you have the most durable coating that I have access to, that I know of, on your table. So, that's as good as I can get. And
yeah, control your kid, because there's nothing on this planet that can control an abuse. I mean, if you're going to step on your table and drive your kids are going to drive their trucks on it, it's going to scratch. It just is.
But
It's
2K
not
urethane is awesome stuff.
It is.
Not because on the other hand, shellac is beautiful, but it's not known for its durability.
Well, that may be true, but let me tell you this. When I was a contractor and clients wanted shellac, but they wanted it more durable, it is possible to modify shellac to make it waterproof, alcohol-proof, and as hard as conversion varnish, and still look like shellac. I did it all the time. You're putting additives in there. You're using these things called acryloids. They're acrylic resins, and they were primarily designed for conservators. Use it a lot. People that conserve fine furniture, and they were from Ciba Geigy and BASF, and they're in different solvent parameter systems. There's a thing called a solvent parameter chart, and it's a chart that lists pretty much all the solvents on them, and it talks about comparable solvents. And so it's like the first time I tried to figure out how to make an oil-based dye. An oil-based dye, not a water-based dye, an oil-based dye. And I had figured out how to do that. And this was back in the early 2000s. I had a house that had these 50-foot long, 12 by 15-inch fir beams in the house. And we had to make the color match like 80 years. And so I had to dye that beam because I knew that there was the only way I could do it. But if I used water, it would suck it right up. There was no way I could control it. You can't stain a softwood. So I said, I have to figure out how to make an oil-based dye so that I could control it over this 50 feet. So I took a natural stain, or I took a alcohol-based dye in powder form, and I mixed it in xylene, because xylene is equivalent on the solubilities parameter chart to alcohol. And so I knew that it would dissolve. And then I took the xylene and I put it in a neutral oil stain, a natural oil stain, no pigment in it. And I could totally control it over 50 feet. And I dyed that whole beam, and it blended perfectly. And up until that point, that did not exist in the world. So,
all right, so I'm going to be looking up the solvent parameter chart now tonight. And, we're going to be. I might have to make a post just to inform every other human being who has no idea what a solvent parameter chart is, like myself.
Solubilities parameter chart. So yeah, it's a thing, but it's good knowledge to have. It really is.
Yeah. So back to that
yes.
point that we were talking about.
Yes.
And at ZK Finishing School, we talk about this a lot. It is we are trying to understand core concepts, right?
Right.
And when we understand core concepts, we can apply them to all situations, right?
Right.
If you learn exact, detailed stuff, if you just tell me this is the formula, right, to get that look,
right,
and that's all I have, the next time a client wants something different, I got nothing, right?
Right. Right.
But if I can understand the core concepts of what are the parameters what are the variables that you played with, and so I love the idea of learning in concepts.
Right.
And I think it is very important. And someone earlier said something about that. Like, as a professional, that is my job, is to have the knowledge to be able to get you whatever you're looking for, right?
Right.
If you're a client, I have a bunch of tools to get you what you're looking for. And the
Right.
more tools I have, the better I can serve you.
Sure.
But unfortunately, there's just not, it's tough to find this information, right?
Absolutely it is.
It's not like we go to trade school and we go through a 4-year program and 2 years of its book work, and we all study all of this stuff, and every painter in this listening right now, and all the painters, we've all gone and got a 4-year degree in coatings.
Right.
And it's not like that. We've got what our bosses gave us, and maybe what we found if we're really obsessive on the internet or something.
Right.
So how do we find out, what are some resources that we could use to further ourselves as far as this type of stuff? How did you learn all this stuff?
That's a good question, because a lot of the stuff that I found really wasn't available on the internet. They're not readily available on the internet. I mean, a lot of the information I came across came from conservators' journals, journals that were specifically focused on men and women who want to conserve antiques, because that's really the path for me. That's what I did the deep dive in. And once I understood that, shellac and organic resins provide depth that's just, my God, man, when you see it, there is no turning back, trust me. And the reason the reason some of those products are just not common today is because they do not fit the new model, the production model. So they don't fit. They don't dry fast enough. You can't set it up in 10 minutes. And so they fall out of favor. And you think about that up into, say, 1980. From 1920 to 1980, in that 60-year period, nitrocellulose lacquer was the standard. All furniture was nitrocellulose lacquer, one component. Definitely different variables of that, different levels of quality, but you can fix that. It's like shellac. It burns right back into the previous layer. But then in 1980, pre-cat shellac came out. Pre-cat lacquer. Conversion varnish was coming out in some furniture that really started back in the 60s, but it really didn't hit until, in furniture till probably into the 80s at some point. So it's 40 years old, conversion varnish, the knowledge there. And, but then post-catalyzed products came out, mostly post-catalyzed lacquer, and by then conversion varnish was fully vetted in the coatings area, in the furniture industry. And, when you compare a 2K urethane to a conversion varnish, I mean, it's not even close. Especially when you use a 2K acrylic urethane, and that's either solvent or water. But a 2K acrylic urethane has clarity. It looks like water. I mean, the depth is unbelievable. Plus, it's actually flexible. I mean, it's a hard coating. But when you take it, when you're building a piece of furniture and you're shipping it, you're building it in California and you're shipping it to Colorado, where the humidity is less than 10%. It's so dry there in the mountains that they shrink like crazy. And most coatings, a conversion varnish is guaranteed to crack, but not a 2K acrylic urethane will move.
So what did they coat? So you found all this stuff through conservation of the group of people who conserve and restore old historic furniture, right?
Yes.
Because there's like pieces of furniture that are worth millions of dollars, right? There's like,
absolutely. Yep.
There's crazy pieces of furniture that were amazing when they were built, and they're super rare, and like the King of England owned it one time, or obviously I don't know a lot about it. But I know there is this crazy world of incredibly expensive furniture.
Right.
And so that's a great way for people to learn is to go down that route, you're saying. And what was on those pieces of furniture when they were originally made? And what are they being restored with today?
It depends on what decade, but say up to the 17th century, the later part of the 17th century, you were just getting into shellac, but basically before then were a lot of tree resins, waxes, and oil. And, people, you would be surprised. I mean, they were using Damar and Elemi. These are natural occurring resins that come out of the ground, tree roots, and they would burn it and synthesize it, and but primarily it was oil and wax, and they were made on site, and they didn't really use stain in the conventional sense because the pigments are natural. They were actually using dyes too.
Let's talk about wax.
Okay.
Because we've used some wax, but I have a very, very I have a very little bit of, just a little bit of information about wax.
Okay.
Could you explain to us the world of wax as a top coat and the intricacies of it and what I just don't know a lot about it.
So you think about back in just in the United States, the waxes that were made were primarily beeswax, and the hardest wax on the earth is carnauba wax, and that's actually a natural wax. And so most waxes today are blends, and shellac has wax, so there is shellac wax, and it does provide a depth. But I do believe that if you're going to use wax today as your final layer, it really needs to be on top of something durable underneath it, like a varnish. And even shellac, you can put straight shellac on and then coat it with wax. And it provides a look. It's a texture. It's a physical texture. It does provide depth. You can make, I just did a sample for a project where I made liming wax. Now, you can buy liming wax, but I prefer to make it. I use a wax base and then add pigment to it because there's a certain color I want. And, that the colors, that's another deep dive. I mean, my way of getting color is different than everybody else's way of getting color. I mean, the primary way that color is taught today doesn't make sense to me. It never did. And when I consult with companies to make colors for projects, I walk on these jobs where they have already burned through months, literally months, trying to get samples from their vendors. And I look at them like, why? And I see the samples, and they're mostly commercial projects that I get involved with, and they literally, it takes 2 to 3 weeks to generate a sample in this process, and there's 7, 8 of them deep. So you're talking 3, 4 months. And I look at the samples, and they're all the same. They'll get the designer will give the vendor a piece of laminate because that's what they have. And the vendor they can't understand how to translate a piece of plastic to wood. It doesn't make sense to them. And they're not getting it. And so they'll spend literally months and thousands of dollars of man hours and labor in the sample process. And I'll give you a clear example. I worked on this project. It happened to be in Minneapolis. It was for 3 floors of a building. It was a huge project. And when I finally got called, they were 7 months into this project. So they had 3 months of design, then they were 4 months into build, and the client was moving in 8 weeks, 2 months. And they didn't have a color yet. They didn't have a sample that they could make after 7 months. And so I get this call from the architect, and they're frantic. Like, client's moving in 2 weeks. We have to figure this out. And I was pissed, actually, because I'm like, I've had this conversation with you multiple times. At what point are you going to get it? Because my premise to them was, when you design your project, call me then. I will make the formula for the floor, for the doors, for the furniture, for whatever. They'll all be different, but they will all match. And they'll be exactly what you want. Anyway, so
But the problem with that is people, the idea that you would pay a consultant to come up with the color is a foreign concept to people.
I understand that.
Every time I've ever brought it up, clients are like, I'm like, hey, we could, and they're just like, I don't know, just get something close. There's some mental hurdle for clients to get there. And you're right. Like there's just it's not an easy thing to do to get really great matching. Right. There's not a lot of people. It's not something you can just like do it tomorrow. Like you have to know some stuff to be able to get the color matching.
Absolutely.
I would never attempt to do it. That's not something that's in my wheelhouse.
Right. But the premise that I'm making is this, is that, so when I finally did have time to make the color, I will tell you I made that color that they were 7 months into in an hour and a half. An hour and a half. And it was perfect. And it's just the process for getting color. Because most people, again, start with stain. And so you put all these things on your wood, your stain, and then your toner, and your shader, and your glaze, and whatever, and you ultimately lose the wood. Because, you know, you lose the reason why you bought the wood in the first place. You get a color, but it's paint almost now.